Hi everyone, and welcome and thank you for joining us today. My name is Ciara and I'm the Digital Events Manager at Connecting Up and TechSoup New Zealand. Connecting Up and TechSoup New Zealand are part of the InfoExchange Group, a not-for-profit social enterprise that tackles the biggest social challenges through the smart and creative use of technology. For those of you who haven't attended a webinar session with us before, Connecting Up and TechSoup New Zealand facilitate an annual training calendar of online webinars, workshops, boot camps, and webcons to help the social sector upskill in all things digital. Check out our training and education menu on our website for more events coming up online. But enough about that. Today I'm excited to welcome you to the threat of ransomware and defending your organization with Conan Daly from the IT team. Conan is a general manager of the IT team New Zealand, based born in the cloud managed service provider. Over the last 10 years, Conan and his team have worked alongside many commercial and non-profit organizations, supporting them in their migration to the cloud and their adoption of Microsoft 365 suite of technologies. Now, a bit of housekeeping. All your lines are muted, so if you have any technical issues, please type the questions in the webinar questions box and I'll be able to assist you. If you have any questions during the session, please also type this in the question box and Conan will answer them either at the end of the session or during the session when he can. We really encourage you to ask as many questions as you think throughout the session to make it as dynamic and interactive a session as possible. Remember, no question is too silly, but also note your comments and questions will not appear to the entire group. If you have a Wi-Fi connection and have multiple programs open, this can sometimes affect the quality of the audio and video of the webinar. If possible, close all other programs to help you have the best experience possible today. Please note that this webinar is recorded and the link to the recording and the slides will be sent to you as soon as the webinar ends. Before we start, I'd also like to remind you that there's a short survey at the end of the webinar, and if you could please take the time to complete this, we would really appreciate it. Thanks for attending today, and I'll hand you over to Conan.
Thank you, Ciara. Just get you so I can see a bit better. Interesting topic today. I'm not sure how many of you attended the one last week, which was around AI. There is some relationship between these two topics, to be honest. So I'm just multitasking to come to. But ultimately, this is about security, this is about ransomware, and it also is about defense. Now, the defense for ransomware is not always extremely different from other I guess attack vectors like phishing. There's some relationship there, but there are definitely some specifics with ransomware. So it is a very interesting topic. So I think we've got a couple of polls, don't we, Ciara? Hopefully.
Yep, just launched the first one there.
So how much knowledge do you have of ransomware? To be honest. It's anonymous. I'm pretty sure it's anonymous, isn't it, Ciara? So none is a few. Good, cool, very cool. Got to be good to be clear. Basic knowledge. Most people have basic knowledge, so 74%, which is good, and then 13% have quite a bit of knowledge. They might have more knowledge than me, but we'll see. Next poll. Thank you for that, everyone. The next poll, Ciara. Has your organisation been hit by ransomware? And technically, the IT team hasn't, but we have had customers that have. So I'm not sure. I'll probably say yes to that because I've seen it. Okay, well, some have. 13% have. That's good to have that honesty. And 81% no, and 4% not sure. Very good. Okay, is there another one? Is there a third poll? Ciara, or am I mistaken?
Yeah, I'm just about to launch the last one.
The old memory. And so this is around 365. If you're presently using 365, and I'd say no, that would include if you're just using it for Office, like Office software, Word and Excel, etc. It's really if you have data in 365. And no, 17%. And then 41% is just a few elements, and 41% is using it extensively. That's very good. So it's probably as expected. I think what it does mean is I don't have a clear, I need to lean away from this topic, or I need to I can cut this top of the slide. I kind of have to do it all because we've got some people that aren't using 365. Just to be clear though, the people that don't have 365, there is going to be a bit about 365 here, but I have talked more generally in some cases, so it might be a reason to consider it, to be fair. Now my audience view has a poll up, and I'm just wondering if that is meant to.
Yeah, I'm trying to see. I've closed it. Let me see if I can hide it now. Oh, there we go.
I'll just try to reshare, so
yeah,
hopefully that works.
We're up. We're good.
Brilliant. Okay, so I got this quite fancy built-into Office sort of homepage, which is a lot better than my ones. I'm not sure, is that just read for you guys? A little bit? That's okay. So, what are we covering today? What is ransomware? So it's important to talk about what it is, what it's not, how it can be confused. It is in the name, but even malware and antivirus or anti-malware is terminology that can sometimes be used incorrectly, you'd say. We're going to try to do a few ransomware demos. I can tell you, demoing ransomware is extremely difficult. I'll go into that a bit later, but so any variants that are quite well known, Microsoft has gotten extremely good at blocking them. So some of our attempts, one of our staff, we attempted to sort of set up these sort of examples, and we had a bit of difficulty, which is a good sign. We will talk about how to protect yourself and some of the key protections in 365, and there are several other parts to this webinar that we'll go into, and knowing me, we'll probably go in a few different directions, but these are the key topics for today. So a little bit about the IT team. I kind of contractually obliged to do this slide. So 365, since our inception, we provide managed services and IT support, wide range of IT services. The not-for-profits are our main base of customers, and we provide IT services to New Zealand and Australian organisations, including some people that might be on this webinar. So ransomware, the rising threat, question mark. So this is an interesting one because ransomware is not necessarily at its peak from our point of view. Its biggest, like its apex, was probably 2010 to 2018. But if you look at the statistics that circulate around, security reports, those sort of national, global, Deloitte style ones, they will have ransomware as growing. And that is because it is still working its way through the world, particularly even the third world, and still doing damage. Older devices, less protected organizations and governments are being attacked, and they are getting some pretty hefty ransoms being imposed upon them. So they're becoming more widespread, but I'm not going to use it. I was about to use it in sort of a pandemic, so that it might still be going on, but in many cases it has dropped in its importance. So phishing is now is kind of the dominant malware or attack type, but ransomware uses phishing as a delivery mechanism. So that's in a way. So that's to a degree, at least it uses email and tries to catch you out and uses information to lure you to an incorrect location. Now, the other side of it is Windows 10 and 11 have beefed up their security, and so fewer, malware or the ransomware that was able to do a lot of damage in 2013 is just not able to. Probably more importantly though, modern email protection has radically changed. So just to give you some example, if you try to email an exe file, which is often how some of these were delivered, or an MESI file is kind of more modern sort of way. So an exe file is an executable. Often that's installing a program. So you might download if you're downloading Adobe Reader, it would come as an MESI. An exe is probably a bit dated, but MESIs and exes are probably, from most, if you legitimately built yourself an application and you emailed it to a colleague and said, hey, this is a really cool application, I'd like you to try it, Office 365 just wouldn't have a bar in it. It wouldn't let it come in. There's almost no chance it would allow it. And attachments are just generally more scrutinized. Even if you're sending a docx, a document file, or an Excel, what it does is how Microsoft builds how Microsoft assesses your spam is it gives everything a ranking. And as soon as you have an attachment, it kind of adds a 3. And as soon as it gets to a 5 or a 6, it basically is quarantined or potentially blocked, depending on where it is, probably depending on your configuration. So attachments now are more scrutinized, and ransomware's greatest success was through attachments. So that is helping. It's helping to change the landscape of how important or how big ransomware is. But the demands are increasing. So if you were to, and I'll tell you a little bit about some of our instances. I've just realized the occurring spelled wrong. The demands are, I'll tell you a bit later, sorry. The demands are increasing. The other thing is they're no longer just about recovery. So if you have very good backups, you would often find that the ransomware attack would mainly impact you from a continuity point of view, it disrupts you. But now the ransomware, they're going after the likes of hospitals. I know in Australia, there's been some pretty big attacks, and they say, you have 5 days to pay or we're going to leak this information out. And that can be extremely damaging. That can be more damaging than the encryption, because the encryption is about stopping you from being able to access your data, but the leak is, a privacy breach. And if I recall, I'm trying to think of who it was. I believe Latitude might have had that. There was also another Australian, might have been Optus or something. I might be defaming them, but I believe one of those was ransomed, and they didn't stop it. They opted not to pay the ransom. So they're becoming bigger in some ways, but they're less prevalent to the average home user or average business user. But AI, as some of you may have attended the webinar last week, and we touched on this attending it, AI may likely trigger a lift in this, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. So what is ransomware? Simply put, you don't need to read this thing, we're going to come back to it a bit later. Ransomware is a type of malicious software, and that's what malware is. Malware is just short for malicious software. So it's a type of malicious software that encrypts the victim's files and then demands a ransom from the victim to restore the data. Now, technically, it's not just about encryption and restoration, but ultimately that's the simple explanation. So ransomware is a type of malware, just like a virus or a worm, but malware doesn't necessarily mean ransomware because it does require the ransom component. So how does it work? So what happens is the hacker gains access in some way. Now that could be via email with an attachment entering your mailbox. So gaining access might be, well, yes, and then you click on a link and they have access to your machine. So I guess the hacker engages you, or you download a file, and then the hacker gets access to the device. So your machine is open to them, and we will go into that a little bit later. Then the attacker or hacker encrypts the files. Usually they are using a tool that works very fast to encrypt the files. And I could talk a little bit about how this is possible, but in a way, the hacker is kind of acting as you, and they're just writing your Word document. They're updating it with a new content which is encrypted. Now they encrypt the files, it takes a bit of time, and then once completed or towards the end of the completion of that, they notify you and they request a ransom. Now the difference between ransomware now and I guess malware in the 90s is that back in the 90s and 2000s, is viruses or malware were all about destructiveness or chaos. So the hackers were generally people that wanted to see how far their hack could go. It was about reputation and kudos and that kind of thing. It wasn't until the late 2000s that they started to go, hey, we can make money out of this. And it wasn't just about making a name for themselves or seeing if they could do it. In the way that, those chain mails used to go around and then see how far they could go. That was what a lot of viruses were. It was more of just a theoretical, can I do this? But then it became a money thing, and then it became big, and then it became more sophisticated and more intelligent. I think ransomware is a pretty big thing. And phishing, the standard phishing where they're trying to extort you is, so it has come after the ransomware. Oh, excuse me. So there's a lot of ransomware variants that you might have heard. Some of the big ones, WannaCry, Petya, not Petya, so Petya came out, and then later not Petya, which was the same but more destructive. Other ones that are big is Ryuk, but all of these, we don't need to go through all of them. They're a little bit different. And yeah, quite interesting. They're quite scary in the way they do it. Generally, the way they're presented is somewhat subversive and onerous. So it's a bit ominous, sorry, not onerous. So it is a little bit of an intimidating area of the internet, but yeah, these are some examples, and some of them you may have heard of. So I'm going to attempt to show a video. So now, just to explain what we did is we attempted to build, to do some live ransomware demonstrations that we were recording, and we were potentially going to do live. But what happened was the built-in Microsoft functions and just getting it down, very difficult. So we were trying to deploy it in a virtual machine in Azure, and we were trying all these things, and it just wasn't. It just became very difficult because all of the various firewalls and the things that are built into Windows were preventing it. So we realistically realized that we kind of had to use a video of one that was dating back. But so while I'm saying that it's been very difficult, I think that's because we're talking about utilizing known variants. We're not building our own. So that does not mean that there is no threat. It just means the older ones are no longer as much of a threat. So I'm just going to mute this. So what we've got here is we've got an example of someone that set up a virtual machine, and they have, hopefully everyone can see this, please comment if you can't. You should be able to see cats. So they've set up a virtual machine, which is, virtual machine, just a Windows, like a laptop. Let's assume they've set up a laptop, but they've also, so they've set up a laptop, and they're going to show an example of how it's going down. And they've got some pretty crude data on there to give you an idea. So as you can see here, got some photos in a folder of some cats and dogs, some quite nice looking cats and dogs, and these are all editable. We're just showing that these aren't read-only. You can edit them, you can change them. There's nothing sort of special about them. And the reason it's important to show that is because it does show that this user has access to make changes to the files. If you don't have access, generally ransomware can't do it. This is a standard folder. Now, if we jump into email, someone has sent a email to this person. It's imposing themselves as IT support, which I feel attacked about because that's us. But they're suggesting download a patch. It's pretty legitimate. There's not too many spelling mistakes in there. But it is kind of explaining that there's a download a patch, please click this, it'll take a few minutes, yada, 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 lovely IT team. It probably won't look as simple as that, but that's what it is. So then it comes to a location that you will see commonly. This kind of looks a little bit like a OneDrive, to be fair. That's kind of a OneDrive look, and offers to download a zip file. I know that everyone's probably thinking this is obvious, but you did join a webinar about ransomware, and sometimes these things catch people off guard. So download the folder, we open up this zip file, extract it. Generally, nowadays you could just double click on it and then execute this application. Now he's clicked run as administrator, but you probably don't need to run it as administrator for it to work. And then it disappeared. Now, when you go into the cats and dogs, it generally is still there. It doesn't happen instantly. But the computer has started to get a bit slower. things have started to slow down and aren't really moving, but that doesn't mean that the image is inaccessible. This is just one thing that happens with ransomware. It starts to kick off a lot of work. It's like copying every file. Files are still accessible, just a little bit sluggish, and that file that was changed is obviously still there. However, you might notice there is a little file there, and there things are starting to kick off on the machine, which should be a bit of a sign that, you know, computers do unusual things from time to time, so it's not always that obvious. Now, as you can see, this file is not actually accessible now. It's saying that we can't support this format, and you're starting to get pop-ups, command prompt pop-ups. Now, you could say no, you could say yes. Often those pop-ups do occur and people click things, but you are also seeing OneDrive has kicked the person out, which is probably a protection from OneDrive, but they're going to log back in, because the annoying thing about OneDrive is it does pop up from time to time and say things like log in, and you know, that's something that a problem with Microsoft. It has its you know, it does request login and request authentication out of nowhere. So now it takes a bit of time to log in, but I'll just skip across to get to something a bit more interesting. So now what we have is the pictures are inaccessible. I've tried to recover them, but now if we go in, we're going to start to see some files. So you can see the ryoke.readme or ryoke.readme. If we open up that text file, it's also usually on the desktop. You'll see this is what pops up towards the end of the encryption. Network penetrated, still popping up with these annoying command prompts, which is really interesting. That should be a sign that what it's doing is it's just trying to run an elevation technique. It'll say that the backups are encrypted or deleted, and you won't be able to recover it. Don't reset or shut down, although I would imagine that resetting or shutdown would be completely fine. Well, no, we'll talk about that a bit later, but I don't necessarily think it would damage this. It stops the encryption from completing. Importantly, it has a Bitcoin wallet address. This one example is probably lacking a bit of information, but it has a Bitcoin wallet address, and it states the name of the type, right? No system is safe. So that is a kind of crude example of how ransomware does infect. Oh, sorry, let me try and in a bit of trouble. Oh no, I've just kicked my webinar out. One moment. Sorry, team. To switch. Okay, so I'll just share screen again. I'm not sure if my screen is still visible. Yep. Okay, so that was just a bit of a crude, simple example of how it generally works. You gain access somehow, might be via email. It then locks things down, and then eventually it encrypts it, and eventually it sends you a pop-up. And you might think, oh, that looked pretty bloody obvious, and it did. But I think it was a good example of how the simple mechanics of how ransomware generally works. So how does it get in? So phishing or email-based activity is the most common. So when I say phishing, I'm probably using the wrong terminology, but ultimately they do go hand in hand. That someone will be trying to get your credentials, but also they may just be trying to trick you into going to a website to grab something. And phishing is generally when you're trying to trick someone, but often it's correlated with obtaining access to your content or your 365 or your G Suite or your Facebook or whatever. But that is the most common. That will come via email rather than attachment these days. Downloads, so that could be a torrent. Probably the most common infection type for ransomware that happens these days would be kids downloading files, like trying to download a game from a torrent or like Discord or something like that. So they believe they're downloading beta blocks or whatever it is, robo-blocks, sorry, and then they're actually downloading a ransomware thing. And that is something that they do often target young kids that are a little bit less aware. Dodgy websites. We'll talk about scamware, I think it is. This was called soon, but just generally going to a website. Sometimes you find yourself, I find myself, in various cases on a website, I'm like, okay, this is not exactly the safest website. These advertisements are trying to trick me. And those are dangerous. Some of those advertisements might be malwaretising or something they call it. So that dangerous ads. 0-day vulnerabilities is really important. I'm going to come to that soon. And then RDP exploits is also big. So a sort of example, this is technically phishing, I guess, or it's trying to lure you with, pretending to be something that's not. What's interesting here is this might be a little bit dated. There is an attachment here with a zip. I would imagine that Microsoft would now block that. But you also have a link here. So this is common. I think this is a zero-based, zero as an X, the organization, zero-based invoice. And so they're sending something out. And if you click on the link, it'll probably take you to somewhere where it will attempt to download some software, which will attempt to ransomware your computer. Then you might have seen this. Now, this is very Mac oriented, but pop-ups on websites, you don't see it like this, but you'll see you're in a website and then you get something's out of date. This may be infected. Your system is infected with 3 viruses. You blah, blah, blah. They're trying to get you to click on something which either will try and get you to buy something or will download something dangerous. And you just don't know. Some of these are really just trying to sell you. It's a very cynical way to sell a bad product, but you do see it. And usually it takes you down a rabbit hole and then you end up, putting something on your device that you're not. Most often it'll be adware. It'll be an application that's going to generate ads, but sometimes it is potentially ransomware. Scareware is the term. I think I said scamware, scareware. Just quite a good name. Now, 0-day vulnerabilities. This is probably the most important one at the moment. So what is a 0-day vulnerability? The 0-day vulnerability is when there is a vulnerability detected with a key piece of software that is not patched. Now, there's probably a better definition of that, but basically a frequent one. In late March, there was an announcement that there was a vulnerability with Office. And it was actually pretty extraordinary. So, what it was, so when it was 0-day, it meant that it became public to the world that there was a vulnerability, but Microsoft did not yet have a fix for it. What it allowed is you just needed to receive an email that had an attachment, a very, very simple attachment, and it wasn't anything really bad. It just had a bit of code in it. And if that email went into your mailbox, your Outlook on your desktop, laptop, you would be breached, which is pretty incredible. You didn't need to open the email. You didn't need to do anything. You just needed it to get on your computer. So now Microsoft got that patched up pretty quick, and I would say, I'm not trying to scaremonger or anything, I'd say there's at least several people in this room that would not have that updated, because the way that Office does its updates is a bit clunky. Please don't disappear and update your Office now, wait till the end. But that 0-day vulnerability is a common way. What would generally happen is that the hackers or attackers, they would, once they learn about the 0-day vulnerability, they would start to work on how to build something that could take advantage of that. But usually they're not targeting us, they're kind of targeting particular people. They kind of go after people with money, lots of money. And then it kind of pivots to us, which kind of gives us a bit of a leg up in a way. We get a bit of time, which we might not get in the future, but we'll talk about that soon. So that's an example of a 0-day vulnerability. They often are related to Word and Excel. They're often sometimes about enabling content, when you see those pop-ups, or enabling editing. Sometimes those things can trigger a bit of danger. I'm going to show that soon. And now I talked about RDP exploits. I think if you have a remote desktop server, a terminal server, or just a server, and RDP is not really well locked down, that's a very common way that ransomware attacks businesses, because they try and get into your RDP server. They use brute force and various other techniques. And then once they're in, they've got full access to the system, and they can then ransom it really easily. And so, and getting access to a server is just brilliant for one of these hackers, because they know that they've just got your, they can delete the backup sometimes. It's a real powerful sort of position to be in for the attackers. So an example, this is WannaCry. This was I'm just going to show you or explain what we've got here. I probably should have done it earlier, but anyway. So this is what would pop up at the end of the encryption on people's workstations. We actually saw it. We had a customer get hit by it. We had 2 customers get hit by this. The first time it happened, we did not know what was going on because we hadn't seen the pop-up, because it was encrypting their data, and they had such a huge amount of data that it was taking like half the day to encrypt it. What we saw was the data get what we thought was corrupted. So we couldn't figure out what was going on. It was pretty embarrassing, to be honest, but it was a long time ago. It was 10 years, over 10 years ago now, which makes it a little bit better, but we still should have known better. It encrypted what it did is it encrypts the files, and once it gets close to the end, it starts to put those documents up. But this one pops up on screen. Now, what was interesting is back in those days, the malware protection we had in place wouldn't detect the item, and it wouldn't pulling this down. And that was actually helpful, because if it was pulling this down, we wouldn't have seen it. So what this does is it quite well explains what happens, that you've been encrypted. Can you recover your files? Yes, you can, but you would need to pay. How do you pay? It explains the Bitcoin process. Interestingly, this one gave people sort of 3 days to do the payment. And if you don't pay within 7 days, you're in trouble. But it was quite automated. It wasn't seeking to delete backups. This was an automated system, and it just went to this address, and the hackers just cleaned up. So what's also interesting is this was a good example of how the attackers had attempted to make it user-friendly. So they had a contact us page, and if you went to that page, you could call someone who was probably an outsourced, unaffiliated with the money receiving, or not unaffiliated, but they weren't receiving the money. It wasn't the hackers in a dark place, on a phone. It was probably like a call center in India or Philippines, which I believe it was. So you go to contact us and you call someone, and they'd step you through how to make the payment. And the big thing was that it's not as easy as all that to just pay with Bitcoin, particularly back when this came out. So it says 2017, WannaCry was before that. I think there was a similar one in sort of 2013. So yeah, the key thing is they're trying to be as friendly as possible, as helpful as possible, as user-friendly as possible, I should say, because getting the money is the goal. And the more ease of use, the more difficult it is, the less likely they are to get the money. And that's what it's about. It was about extracting the money. It wasn't about creating havoc or reputation. It was about money. And a lot of money did change hands. So we'll come to what happens if you do pay, but what are the warning signs? So dodgy looking emails are obviously dodgy looking. I say dodgy looking. Yeah, that's a decent description. Emails that are a bit suspect are key. And also websites. An attachment that you open that doesn't seem to work. Now, if that happens, could be already a bit of a disaster zone. Very slow device unexpectedly. Now, just to be clear, just because you have a slow device, it doesn't mean there is ransomware. I very often, let's say once every 2 months, find my machine to be going very slow in a way that gives me concern, and I'm going, what is going on with this device? This doesn't make sense. I don't have much open. But so I'm probably panicking more often. But it's not a reason. Just for having a slow device isn't a reason to raise the flag. But if you've got the previous ones and it's going slow, there is a chance that could happen. You might potentially get the odd pop-up from your anti-malware product. It might even say it's cleaned or it's blocked it. But the thing is, it may not actually block it. That's something that happened. The malware products, they would block it, but they wouldn't actually stop it. They would block it from elevating itself. They would block it from sort of encrypting the system, but they wouldn't necessarily block it from encrypting your documents. And then the big one is the files being inaccessible. When you open your Word documents, that you've just got gibberish. And that can be a bit weird because you look at it and you're like, what's going on there? But that is usually a sign that you have had a ransomware attack. And then you'll start to see text files on the desktop, documents, things pop up. You might even see it pop up. The background changer, that was one of the good ones. I can't remember what it was. It would change your background, which is a bit alarming. So what can you do to protect yourself? So backups are a big one. So third-party backup. So if you're on G Suite or 365, a third-party 365 backup is probably not a bad idea. Now, I just want to say that doesn't mean that 365 is not safe. It's just that there are a lot of I guess, scenarios where it might not be as safe. Now, having all your data in OneDrive, Google Drive, or Dropbox, or whatever is also a key part. I probably should put those around the other way. But having your data on there rather than just on the desktop is a good idea, or even on a server. That is a good idea. And I'll come back to why that's good. Potentially an air gap backup. So an air gap is when it's disconnected from the internet. It's kind of old school, but really, when you think about it, if your backups are connected to the internet only, then there's scenarios where they can be attacked as well, or deleted, or cancelled, or whatever. It's a lot of effort to have an air gap, but ultimately it is your only way to be absolutely sure that it's not going to get hit. There was a web provider, a hosting company. I remember this was a long time ago now, and they hosted websites and web applications and everything. Big company. I think they were Australian actually, but they might have been American. And they hosted hundreds and hundreds of websites, quite a successful business. And someone got in and deleted that. They didn't. I'm not sure if it was a ransom. They didn't say it was a ransom, but they got in, got access, and then in one night they deleted the backups and they deleted the content. And so the company just lost everything. And their backups were all online. They were on Veeam or whatever else. And so they were able to be deleted, which is pretty horrifying. And the business basically on Monday sent out a note saying, I'm not sure it was Monday, it was a day, it was several days afterwards, sent out a note saying, we've lost our data, we've lost our backups, I'm sorry, we have to close. And the customers were obviously pretty spare, but they just said, we're done. And they literally closed doors. There was nothing they could do. Which means that maybe it wasn't a ransom, because maybe they would have tried to pay the ransom. Now, other things, strong email filtering is a really important protection, and endpoint protection. So endpoint is your anti-malware, your antivirus, but there's different levels, and we'll come back to that. System updates, that's really key. This is an area where you actually having regular system updates, regular patch updates is going to save you. It's not going to save you from, well, it will a little bit, but it's not going to be the key thing that stops you from clicking on a phishing link or anything, but it is the zero-day vulnerabilities that you're more likely, so even if you don't jump on them on day one, if you're having regular patching, you will get sorted out often before those vulnerabilities are executed. Protection against phishing, that's important. And talking about email protection, protection against dodgy websites, some sort of protection there, which could be that endpoint protection, depending on what you have. A firewall that can be configured to block certain ports, and in the example I'm going to show you soon, you can see why that's important. And just generally user guidance, user training, that type of thing. So I'm going to show another example, another video, and I believe after I finish it, it's going to kick me out again of the PowerPoint, but we'll see. So this example is, I'm not going to show you the ransomware. I'm going to show you an example of a zero-day vulnerability in effect. So on the left we have the hacker's machine. It's a Linux box, so it's command line interface, or this is using command line interface. And on the right you have a team viewer. The person is jumping into a device. Let's say the device is on a table. It's another example device, and they're using team viewer to remotely access it, mainly to allow you to see both at once. So hopefully it's playing. So yes, you've got both machines. You've got the hacker's machine on the left. You've got the normal Windows 10 or 11 machine. It looks like Windows. I don't know, that looks like Windows 10 to me. 10 or 11 on the right. So they've got Windows Defender running, which is the built-in one. It's all working. Green, no problems, no errors. It's up to date. You also got Windows 10 Pro, and it's 20H2, which is, you know, a year old now, but it's not that far out of date. But that's the Crater update anyway. And on this side, this is the command line interface, and it's listening and it's waiting for someone to click into it. So this person goes into an email, sees an attachment. This one's a little bit better than the last one. It's just got, here's my billing information. Downloads a Word document, all fine. This is just a Word document. I'm sure we all get these from time to time. The system's running Office to 2021, so it's not too old. This is not a really bad out-of-date situation. And just by opening that Word document, the hacker is in the computer. There's no signs, there's no, pop-up saying, this and that. It's in. You can see the IP address on the left matches the IP address on the right. This is just to show you that effectively from now, the hacker is accessing this command line interface is like it's on the local machine. So you've got just access just via the Word doc, which is pretty incredible. And that is an example of a zero-day interface. Just to show you how it sort of works, what power this person has, they're going to run PowerShell scripts, and this is an example of what a script kiddie would do. So they just have all the content in the document, and all they need to do, they don't need to be exceptional. They paste these scripts in one by one, and what it's doing is various things that are related to the ransomware. In this case, it's elevating the permissions. It's downloading files to allow it to elevate the permissions. So elevating the permissions is just allowing it so that it can go a bit deeper, so it can encrypt more files, so it can take more control. So one by one, it's grabbing some content and then pasting it. Most of these attacks are orchestrated not by people that are incredibly skilled. They're by people that are using content or scripts or programs that are built by people that are incredibly skilled. So that does increase the number of people. Now, what the guy's done is he's actually just encountered an error. He's forgotten to rename evil to monkey for his scenario, so he'll change that. And then he's effectively just, this is just downloading files and elevating positions. I'll just skip through to show you what we get to. So in this case, he's just showing that this is opening up a document. You can see bank info, it's just a text document, very plain. And on the other side, you have, he can open up this document on a remote computer, and he has the ability to do that as well, to open up that file as well. So everything's still normal, bank protection, he's going to show it later, but Chrome's just normal, everything is acting normal. That's the main thing. There's nothing special about this, and you can open up and access the file system. As you can see, it's the same file tree as before, and he's opening up this document, and there's no known. The scary thing is, if you can imagine yourself, there's nothing on this device compared to the other one. You remember the other one? There was the command line thing popping up. There was prompts and everything. It looked really, really obvious to us. But this one, there is no noticeable impact. And that is why zero-day vulnerability is the most powerful and threatening, because usually it will be completely invisible to us. And we all probably think there'd be signs, and sometimes there are. Sometimes there might be a prompt or something. The person does the wrong thing, they push the wrong button, the hacker, they go a little bit too far, and you get a prompt. You might get, if this person had a different antivirus application, it might have shown it. But that was just really an example. So I'll just exit out of this if I can. Yeah. Here we go. Okay. So ransom. I'll just make sure I'm on the right slide, people. Sorry, yes, ransom. So can you pay the ransom? Yes, you can. So the IT team, prior to 2015, when we kind of realized that we shouldn't do this anymore, we had paid 2 ransoms for customers. So in both cases, just want to say, they were because the people that had been breached or had the ransom hit them, it was personal photos that they wanted back, and they couldn't lose them. So none of the situations were a business ransom. They were all personal. And in both cases, the files, were unencrypted. And I think you have a look online. I want to say this is somewhat controversial. So just to be clear, we should not pay the ransom. No one should pay the ransom. You are effectively, giving them money to continue to harm others. But people have paid ransoms. There have been some big organizations that have paid ransom, because often it is potentially the difference between surviving as an organization and sort of just self-destructing. But when you think about it, when you look online, you'll see things that will say, don't pay, there's no guarantee, they'll probably keep your money and not keep your files. The reality is that it's pretty well known that generally the ransom will give you your files. Now, I'm not saying that there isn't lots of scenarios where people haven't got them, but it's quite an automated system. And when you think about it, the reason why you get your files back or you get access to your files is because that's a good business model. That reputation and it working and it succeeding is likely to generate more money. If everyone knew that you pay the ransom and you get nothing, then the model wouldn't work. They wouldn't get as much money, particularly the big ones, the big hospitals and everything. When they enter a negotiation with the ransomers, they tend to negotiate and then they pay, and sometimes they do get their money back, and that is they generally do get their files back. So I think will you get files back? The other side of it, will you get the files back if you don't pay the ransom? Well, what's been known to happen is that a few years down the track, there's been sort of keys released or keys found, and people can sort of do it. So I guess if you're in a situation where you had your documents encrypted and you didn't want to pay for them, but you didn't want to, you did want them back, like let's say family photos, it might be best to actually back up those encrypted documents if you didn't have backups and hold on to them, because there is a chance that down the track you'll be able to unencrypt them. So that's a factor. But should you pay the ransom? No, it is not good. It's not a good message. It's bad in every way. But I guess everyone has different circumstances, so no judgment from me. But I guess it's not a good thing. I guess the question though is, can you do it? Yes. Will you get your files back? Probably. So Microsoft 365 now. What is it doing? It's increasing. It's increasingly improving its security protections. Moving on to this phase of the presentation. So what does the base 365 do to protect you? So if you've got Business Basic or just Exchange, what do you get? Well, you get Forefront, which is the built-in 365 monitoring, and that'll give you some basic protection against key threats. It'll stop them out. It'll stop the exe files and some of the zips, but it's not as impressive. And I personally think Microsoft shouldn't monetize email protection, but that is my take. Now, Windows Defender, if you're running Windows and you don't have an antivirus product, you don't have an Avast or a McAfee or whatever, Norton, or an ESET or a more serious one, Windows Defender will be built in. Now, it is pretty good, Windows Defender, even though that example that we used before showed it sort of not working, but it is a decent system. But there are others that are a bit more powerful, and it has improved a lot in the last 5 years. SharePoint and OneDrive, they have protection against ransomware built in. So it's gotten a bit better, just to be clear. So back in the day, what would happen is the ransomware would write a copy of the file like 100 times, boom, 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 just over and over every couple of seconds. And what would happen is that would upload each additional copy, even though there was almost no change to 365, and it would run out of copies it would keep. So then you'd lose your copy. Generally, they've put in some protections. My understanding is, I haven't seen that for some time, but protections to stop that. The recycle bin in SharePoint and OneDrive, I should say, you can roll that. You can often get data. There's no backups on 365, but you can do rollbacks. Now, Windows, the other thing is Windows is significantly more secure than it was 10 or 5 years ago. It's just built in, it's gotten a bit more protected. People used to say that Macs never had viruses, and one of the reasons was that Macs, the Mac OS, it had far greater sort of prevention of allowing you to just open anything. So on Windows, you could build your own application and you could just go run and it would work. On Mac, you couldn't do that. It'd have to be signed. It'd have to be some things that would tell you if you're trying to install something. So Windows is generally far more secure than 10 years ago and 10 years before that, and that does help. Now, what are the advanced protections that exist? So if you're using your business premium licenses, and you should get 10 business premium licenses for free with TechSoup, Kiara can send some message out, or we can put a note towards the end if you need some information on that. You can get Defender for 365, which, as I said, is the elevated email protection. It's available on Business Premium. It gives you better protection against phishing, malware, allows advanced quarantine. It allows tooltips, I've spelled that wrong, it's kind of like a Kiwi error. But it gives you tooltips, which kind of says you haven't received an email from this person for some time or before. Now, what we're finding is Defender is extremely configurable, which can be a nuisance, so we're constantly kind of evolving it, but it is very powerful. Even the quarantining is really interesting. Defender for endpoint. Now, this is also with Business Premium. It builds upon Windows Defender, so the built-in Microsoft one, it just allows, it's more powerful, it finds more, and it gives you some advanced protection, and it'll even tell you if you've got any vulnerabilities like Zoom or whatever that is vulnerable. And there's further license types that allow things like data exfiltration protection and very, very advanced configuration. Defender, and Defender, you can also have advisories, so it'll notify you through 365 if there's something you need to be aware of globally. Other things like MFA and conditional access will improve your protection. Just the things that will stop people from gaining access to your machine or your 365 account. Additional protections that you could consider: an advanced SOC or SIEM service. I think I've got that spelling wrong. Which is like a Rocket Cyber or Huntress or Scout. They monitor your logs of 365 and your endpoint and kind of elevate things above probably a standard MSP like us. We can't look at 1,000 logs on your environment, but they can. Advanced endpoint protection, something like SentinelOne or CrowdStrike is real. But these are the things, these two and Defender for Endpoint are really about protecting you against ransomware once it gets on your machine. A third-party 365 backup is a very good idea. Making sure you've got patch management for those zero-day vulnerabilities is key. And if you have a server, make sure your backups are really good. Make sure you've got them in 2 places, an air gap ideal. So what's next? AI. This is kind of where it gets a little bit freaky. So all of this, I kind of said earlier that ransomware is kind of on the decline. Someone probably in the comments will tell me I'm talking rubbish. But fundamentally, as a managed service provider, it's not the common threat that we see. But the area where there is a threat is that zero-day vulnerability. So that when zero-day vulnerabilities occur, ransomware can get in quickly, do damage, and you have more difficulty protecting yourself. There was a case about 2 months ago, so we're fans of a product. We use a product called 3CX, which is a phone system. And they were breached globally. The attackers, they got access to 3CX and then through one of their developers, and then got access to their code repository, and then pushed code down to all of the servers, including all of ours, and then that pushed out to everyone's machines. It was quite incredible. It was like a Trojan horse, I guess, traditional Trojan horse. But they didn't do anything. So the attackers, they were from North Korea, and they were trying to get like the US government and big business and everything. And so they had code on, they had access to so many machines globally, like millions, and they didn't actually execute on it. Or they didn't execute on it in a way that was known. But if they had distributed ransomware, it would have been absolutely terrible. But a product like a SentinelOne or a Huntress, they had started to pick up on it. And so this really interesting thing happened, where all the IT people were going, hey, my antivirus applications are removing my phone system software for no reason. And these companies were saying, we're detecting bad code. So they said they're detecting bad code. And then after 5 or 6 days, 3CX let everyone know that there was a legitimate hack. So it took a while. So those systems, some of the systems, the advanced ones, were successfully able to stop it, even though it wasn't a known issue because they detected a change. That was really good. So anyway, so back to point, AI is going to accelerate everything. That's the concern, right? When there's a zero-day vulnerability, people won't need to spend time trying to understand how to execute it, and then who are we going to attack? Oh, well, let's attack a company in New Zealand, or let's go after the NGOs in Australia. They're just going to go, this is the vulnerability, write an exploit, boom, it's going to come back. Okay, go for it. But that is the fear. So we won't have 3 weeks, 3 months, 3 years before we actually start getting attempts at these zero-day vulnerabilities. We might get 3 hours or a day or something. And I can tell you, based on how long it took us to get all our customers' office sorted, like including the people that were away and the people on maternity leave and all that type of thing, it takes a while. So we see an elevated risk and ransomware coming back hard when the AI sort of explosion sort of takes off in the nefarious elements of the AI sort of explosion. So that's the AI side of it. And so I think it is going to get more, it's going to become more of an issue. And I think you just don't want to be one of the low-hanging fruit. Like, just, can't say that you can do certain things to protect yourself perfectly, but you just don't want to be one of the low-hanging fruit. So where to from here? Assess your current situation, determine your highest risk, create a bit of a plan, delve deeper into 365. The more stuff you got in 365, the more using, probably the more secure you're going to be. Question time. Wow, we actually finished on time, Kara, sort of. 1:57.
Not bad, Con. I sent you a few questions through there. Let me know if you can read them.
I couldn't share the thing. Okay, so Joseph has said, we've recently gained access to MS not-profit portal. We're migrating a little overwhelmed by the options. Defender 365, Defender for Outlook, Azure AD, Endpoint, Intune, and heaps more. Yet connecting up, does they have any resources? There was likely a historic webinar we have done on 365 security that will be under connecting up. We have another one coming up soonish, Kara, am I right, on 365 security? Or is that?
Yeah, we've got 2 or 3 coming up. I'll probably include links to them at the end of the webinar. When I send out the link for this recording, I'll put that into the body of the email as well. But yeah, as you mentioned, we do have a lot of resources on Connecting Up website. And I can send a link, put in there, and point people in the right direction if they need more help as well.
Yeah, I think that's perfect. And so I think, Joseph, there are some, and so having the one that we will do soon will probably be quite up to date, but the older one will probably be still pretty relevant to you. I think Defender for 360. Yeah, look, firstly, Microsoft's branding of their products is very confusing, and even we get into debates internally about stop calling it this because it's not the right name. But fundamentally, Defender for 365, which is traditionally called ATP, is the email-based protection. It's really powerful, and it is definitely recommended. We'd also always recommend that you have Azure AD for your workstations, Azure AD Workplace Join. The endpoint is becoming more of an important thing. But yeah, have a look at those resources, and hope to see you in the security webinar. Now, why would insurers warn against not paying the ransom? I assume that means warn against paying the ransom. I believe because it's just not the right thing to do. You're kind of perpetuating the system. So you're giving money. It's just gonna expand it. If no one pays the ransom, they'll move on to something else. Hopefully, or they'll get more sophisticated. But paying the ransom is not a good call. I think paying the ransom, unrelated to cyber security, is probably something that insurers would recommend against. Sorry, I shouldn't necessarily say this, but if one of your family was kidnapped, I don't necessarily think they'd tell you to pay the ransom. So I think it's not a good thing. Now, if you pay the ransom and get your, Liliana has asked the question, if you pay the ransom and get your files back, how likely is it that the hackers will repeat the deed again since they have already gotten the entry point? So it's a great question, Liliana. I think the reason why it has been useful, the reason why it has worked that you pay it and you're good, is because it's all automated. So they require you to like the example that I showed, which I think was WannaCry, it required you to open an attachment and click on it. And it was all sort of spreading around the world automated. They weren't going, right, I'm going to break into Colin's laptop and then get access. And then he's going to pay the ransom, I'm going to do it again. If you click the link and did it again, then you would get encrypted again. It's just all automated. There's very little targeting, that kind of thing. So the thing is that they wouldn't target you necessarily. Well, it's not as if you pay it and then it unencrypts and then 5 minutes later it hits you again. That generally the system is built and they kind of explain it to remove and clean and then it's gone. Because you have to click on an executable to kick it off generally. But usually there are databases on the dark web of people that have fallen victim and paid. And so there is a chance that you might become a bit of a target. So that's the challenge with that. What I think is in the modern I guess environment, if you're a hospital and the attackers say, we've got access to your documents, we're going to leak it. I would imagine that if they paid, the attackers are not going to delete those files, and then a year later they might come back and ask for more or just something. I think that's the challenge. So you're kind of blackmailed with no confidence that it's not going to be repeated. So yeah, that's why I think it's different. But I think the automated systems, it makes, there's probably a justifiable reason why you'd pay the ransom and get your data back and be confident that you're not going to be breached again, unless you're a bit silly and you click on the same thing again. Not saying you should do it, but yeah. I think that is pretty much all. So thank you to everyone. If there's any other questions that come in, please send. Oh, we do have one from Harinda, excuse me. Sorry, Defender for 365, is that Defender for Office 365? Oh, look, I believe so, Harinda. They do change their naming very often. It'll be Defender for Office 365 or 365, yes. So thank you everyone for your questions. Karen, I can pass back to you.
Yes, thank you, Colin. Just had a quick look. The security for 365 are running on the 12th of July. So I'll include a link to that for everybody if you want to sign up to that. And we'll be back with Conan then. Yep, after this, I will send out an email the next day or two with the link for these recordings, and also any files or any videos that Conan showed today, we can attach them as well. But other than that, thank you so much again, Conan. Always a pleasure. And we'll see you again soon.
Thank you, everyone. Take care. Stay safe.